You deserve better than me, Megan. Nathan's words pierced the silence of our private dinner. The room froze, and he reached for Vanessa's hand, not mine. I've been trying to find the right time to tell you. He trailed off. I met his gaze, calm despite the storm brewing inside. Actually, Nate, I said, sliding a manila folder toward him. Your timing is perfect. He opened it, his face draining as he saw the acquisition papers for Omni Solutions. Now mine. What is this? He stammered. It's simple, I replied, raising my glass. While you were building a future with Vanessa, I was securing mine. You're right about one thing though. I do deserve better. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. Megan Morgan's world had shattered just months before. She had once been at the top of her game, running a marketing firm, supporting her husband, Nate, as he built Omni Solutions, a tech company that had grown from a small startup into a massive player in the industry. Their marriage was supposed to be a partnership in every sense. But when Megan discovered Nate's affair with a woman named Vanessa, her world came crashing down. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined, and everything she thought she knew about her life, her marriage, her future, her place in the world, was upended. In the aftermath of the betrayal, Megan made a decision that would change the course of her life. Instead of succumbing to the overwhelming pain of the betrayal, she chose to take back control. She did the unthinkable. She orchestrated a hostile takeover of Omni Solutions. It was a move fueled by more than just anger. It was about reclaiming her life and her power. She was done being defined by her role as Nate's wife. She was going to define herself, and she was going to take charge of the company that had once been a symbol of their shared success. The decision to take over Omni was calculated. Megan had the resources to do it. She had carefully studied the company's financials and identified a strategic weakness that she could exploit. The move wasn't just about vengeance. It was about securing her future, about showing the world that she was more than just Nate's wife. She could be a force in her own right, and this takeover would prove it. The transition was anything but smooth. Megan found herself walking a fine line between asserting her new role and managing the fallout from the takeover. Employees, who had once looked up to Nate as their leader, now had to adjust to the new reality. Megan was in charge. Some embraced the change. Others, especially those loyal to Nate, struggled. It wasn't easy, and Megan often found herself working late into the night, revising plans, meeting with clients, and handling internal crises. But there was no other choice. She had to make it work. Her first few weeks as CEO were a blur. Megan had always been a strategic thinker, but this was something else entirely. She was rebuilding a company while simultaneously rebuilding herself. Every day was filled with meetings, financial projections, and difficult decisions. She was constantly on edge, her mind racing through various scenarios, trying to predict every possible outcome. The weight of it all was immense. Still, she pushed through, her determination driving her forward. As the weeks went on, it became clear that her presence at the helm of Omni was starting to make a difference. Revenue began to rise, clients started to come back, and internal morale, while not perfect, was improving. Megan had a vision for Omni that was clear and compelling. Innovation, transparency, and growth without sacrificing the company's core values. People were beginning to see her as the leader they needed. They weren't just following her because she was Nate's ex-wife. They were following her because she was capable and strong. Despite her success in the business world, the personal side of her life was still in turmoil. She had yet to process the emotional wreckage of her marriage, and seeing Nate at the office every day was a constant reminder of the man who had betrayed her. He had been the founder, the driving force behind Omni, and yet now he was relegated to a smaller advisory role. The tension was palpable. They had both agreed to keep their interactions professional, but it was an uneasy truce at best. Every conversation was laced with the unspoken history of their failed marriage. Megan had no illusions that she and Nate could ever return to what they once had. But in the boardroom and in the office, they had to find a way to coexist. It was the only option, for the sake of the company. The personal animosity was something they both had to compartmentalize, and it was a constant, daily battle for Megan. There were moments when she thought she could finally look at Nate and not feel the sting of betrayal, but they were fleeting. The emotional scars were deep, and the process of healing, while necessary, would take time. One evening, as Megan sat at her desk, reviewing the latest financial reports, she was struck by the realization that she hadn't taken a day off in weeks. The work had consumed her, as it always did. The company, her marriage, and the ongoing divorce had all demanded her attention. It was all too much, and yet, she couldn't seem to pull herself away. She felt like she was trapped in a cycle of work and worry, with no space for herself. That night, after yet another long day of meetings and decisions, she texted Alicia, her best friend, with whom she had shared both the highs and lows of her life for years. "Drink at Riverview in 30, she typed. Alicia was quick to respond. Already there. The upscale bar at the Meridian Hotel had become a familiar spot for them. It was quiet, intimate, and offered sweeping views of the river that cut through Oakage. Over drinks, Alicia became Megan's sounding board, as she always had. "You look exhausted," Alicia said, eyeing Megan's weary expression as she sat down. Megan gave a dry laugh. "Honestly, I'm not sure when the last time I took a day off was." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "You need a break, Meg. You've proven yourself. The company is doing well. Now, you need to show yourself that you're more than this job. You're more than the CEO of Omni. You're you." Megan frowned, her thoughts swirling. She hadn't really considered that. "I've been so focused on rebuilding everything. But maybe you're right." Alicia pressed. "Seriously. You've done more than enough. You've built a company from the ashes, fought your way into this role, and led with grace. Now, it's time to rebuild you." Alicia's words hung in the air. Megan knew Alicia was right. She couldn't continue living in reaction to her past. The past months had been consumed by survival. Now it was time to focus on rebuilding her own life, outside of work and her marriage to Nate. The next day, Tyler, her older brother, reached out. He had always been protective of her, and she could hear the concern in his voice. "I've got a proposition for you," he said over the phone. "A weekend getaway. I've got access to a lake house up north. I think you need to get away, clear your head." Megan hesitated. It was tempting, more tempting than she wanted to admit. A break from Oakage, from the office, from everything. But there was more to the invitation than just a chance to rest. Tyler added, "It's just the two of us, but there's also my buddy David. He's between assignments, staying at the guest cabin. A quiet, no-pressure kind of weekend." Megan smiled, knowing exactly what Tyler was doing. "Is this a setup?" she asked. Tyler, ever the instigator, feigned innocence. "No setup, just an opportunity to meet someone new. David's a great guy, recently divorced, so he gets it." Megan paused, then sighed. "Fine, I'll come. But make it clear to David that I'm not looking for anything. No drama." "Crystal clear," Tyler promised. That weekend at Lake Chatham could be exactly what she needed. An escape. Time to breathe, time to think. Not about work. Not about Nate. Just about her. As Megan packed for the trip, she thought back to the woman she had been when she first married Nate. She had been ambitious, sure, but she had been a different person, living her life in the shadow of her husband. Now she was the CEO of Omni. She was carving out a future of her own, and the road ahead, while still uncertain, was hers to travel. She locked her apartment door and left for the weekend, ready for a new chapter, one that wasn't defined by betrayal, work, or the past. It was time to step away, even if only for a few days, to start figuring out who she really was when the dust settled. The drive to Lake Chatham was quieter than Megan had expected. Tyler, usually a chatty and energetic presence, seemed to sense the weight of the last few months on her. She stared out the window, watching the cityscape blur into lush greenery as they ventured farther from Oakage. The stillness in the car was almost therapeutic. For the first time in a long while, Megan didn't have to worry about work or the fractured remnants of her marriage to Nate. The lake house was tucked away on a hillside overlooking the crystal-clear waters. It felt like another world entirely, far removed from the chaos of her day-to-day life. The scent of pine trees and fresh air was a welcome relief from the constant hum of oakage downtown. She could hear birds chirping and the gentle rustling of the trees as they got out of the car. Tyler led her to the house, a cozy wooden cabin with large windows that offered a panoramic view of the lake. It was the perfect retreat. She could already feel the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, just from the sight of the tranquil surroundings. Inside, the space was simple yet inviting. An open-plan living room with rustic furniture and soft, plush throws. It was exactly the kind of place Megan needed. Quiet. Peaceful. David, Tyler's friend, was already there. He stood by the kitchen counter, pouring himself a coffee. He was tall, with dark hair that had a few streaks of gray at the temples, and he had a warm, approachable demeanor. Megan could see why Tyler thought he would be a good match for her. He seemed like someone easy to talk to, without any pressure. "Hey Meg," Tyler said as he turned back from setting down the suitcase. "This is David." "Nice to meet you," Megan said with a polite smile, though part of her felt an odd mix of curiosity and discomfort. It had been so long since she'd been around someone new, someone not tied to her work or her past with Nate. David smiled back, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "Likewise. Tyler's told me a lot about you. I hope this weekend will be a nice break for you." Megan nodded, grateful for the gesture. "I'm sure it will be." The next few hours passed with casual conversations, a few laughs, and a shared lunch. Tyler had a great sense of humor, and David was easygoing. They spent the afternoon hiking the trails around the lake, the peaceful atmosphere soothing Megan's frazzled mind. David's background in photojournalism gave him an interesting perspective on the world, and Megan found herself intrigued by his stories of traveling to different parts of the world, capturing moments of humanity in all its raw beauty. By the time they returned to the lake house, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light over the water. Megan felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of freedom. For so long, her identity had been wrapped up in her work and in her marriage to Nate. Now, standing by the water, surrounded by two people who didn't know the intricate details of her life, she felt lighter. Tyler caught her looking out over the lake and nudged her gently. "How are you feeling?" Megan took a deep breath. "Surprisingly good. I didn't realize how much I needed this." She smiled, genuinely for the first time in a while. "Thank you, Tyler." He grinned back. "You're welcome. You deserve it." That evening, they all gathered on the porch, enjoying a simple dinner of grilled salmon and vegetables, followed by wine under the stars. The conversation turned to more personal topics as the night went on. David shared stories of his divorce, how it had been difficult to reconcile his image of his former wife with the person she had become after the split. Megan could relate more than she cared to admit, but she didn't want to go too deep into her own experiences just yet. Instead, she let herself enjoy the easy banter and the sense of normalcy she hadn't had in so long. She realized that, for the first time in months, she wasn't living in reaction to anything. She was simply being. She was just Megan. After dinner, as the others retired for the night, Megan stayed outside a little longer, sipping on her glass of wine. The quiet rustle of the trees and the rhythmic sounds of the water against the shore helped to still her thoughts. The weekend had already provided more clarity than she had expected. Maybe it wasn't just about getting away. It was about finding a way to reorient herself in the world. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her assistant. "Press release about your CEO appointment is getting a lot of attention. A few publications have asked for interviews. Let me know how you want to handle it." Megan sighed. It was a reminder that, even here, she couldn't fully escape her responsibilities. But she had come this far, fought so hard for this moment, and she wasn't about to let anything derail her now. She set her phone down on the table beside her and looked out at the water again, the moonlight dancing on its surface. She couldn't change what had happened in the past, but she had the power to shape the future. She was still figuring it out, but for the first time, Megan felt like she had more control over her life. A fresh start wasn't just possible. It was already happening. The next morning, Megan woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. The previous night's wine and conversation hadn't just been a welcome distraction. They'd also given her a much-needed sense of perspective. As she sat on the balcony with her coffee, she glanced out at the lake, the sunlight glinting off the surface in shimmering patterns. The water, so still and calm, seemed like the perfect metaphor for where she hoped her life was headed. Peaceful, steady, and uninterrupted by the chaos that had defined her for so long. Tyler and David were still asleep when Megan decided to take a morning walk along the lake. The cool morning air felt like a soft embrace, the quiet only broken by the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves. As she walked, her mind began to wander back to the challenges that awaited her once she returned to Oakage. The Horizon proposal had moved forward smoothly, but the road ahead was still uncertain. Nate's involvement in Omni had been minimized, but the ripple effects of their broken marriage and the acquisition were impossible to ignore. Megan's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer. The final settlement papers for your divorce have been filed. Once signed, everything will be officially closed. Congratulations on this new chapter. A wave of mixed emotions hit her. On one hand, she was relieved. The process had dragged on longer than she'd expected, and though the financials had been sorted early on, it was the emotional conclusion she'd been waiting for. On the other hand, the finality of it felt overwhelming. It was official now, she was free. Free from Nate, free from the constant reminders of their fractured relationship. And yet, there was still a small part of her that wasn't quite sure what to do with that freedom. She tucked her phone away, determined to enjoy the moment. She wouldn't let the past weigh on her today. When she returned to the lake house, Tyler and David were having breakfast. They greeted her with smiles, and Tyler teasingly asked if she'd been off on a soul-searching journey by the lake. Megan laughed. Maybe. Just a little walk to clear my head. As they ate, the conversation turned to the future. Specifically, what was next for Megan after her time at Omni. Tyler, sensing her growing restlessness, casually asked, "So, what's your plan? What's the next step after all of this?" Megan looked at him, considering his question carefully. She had spent so much time thinking about her work, about rebuilding the company and proving herself after everything that had happened with Nate. But she realized she had spent almost no time thinking about her, about what she wanted outside of work, outside of the aftermath of her marriage. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, meeting his gaze. "I've been so focused on Omni, on proving to myself that I could handle this, that I've forgotten to think about what I want. Not what's expected of me, or what's next on the corporate ladder, but what makes me happy, truly happy." David, who had been quietly listening, smiled. "It sounds like you're already on the right track, then. You've taken control of your career. Now, maybe it's time to take control of your life outside of work." His words struck a chord with Megan. Maybe it was time to make some space in her life for things that weren't driven by productivity, by the need to succeed or to keep her mind distracted from the pain of her past. She had spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect CEO, that she had forgotten how to just be Megan. After breakfast, the three of them headed out for another hike. The sun was higher now, and the trails around the lake were more crowded with families and other hikers. As they made their way along the path, Megan couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment, one that had been foreign to her for so long. She wasn't thinking about her next meeting, or the Horizon deal, or Nate's exit. For the first time in months, she was just existing, enjoying the beauty around her, savoring the moment. By the time they returned to the lake house, Megan felt lighter, as though the weight she had been carrying for so long was finally beginning to lift. That afternoon, she and Tyler went into town to explore the local shops. The small, lakeside village was charming, with narrow streets lined with boutiques and cafes. It was the kind of place Megan had always imagined herself visiting but never quite had the time for. She bought a few trinkets, a hand-carved wooden necklace and a small painting of the lake, a reminder of this time she was beginning to cherish. As evening fell, the three of them sat out on the porch with a bottle of wine, watching the sun set over the lake. The conversation turned to lighter topics: Tyler's latest project at work, David's upcoming photography assignments, and the book Megan had picked up from the local shop. It was refreshing to not have to talk about mergers, acquisitions, or the fallout from her divorce. For a few precious hours, there was no pressure, no expectations, just connection. Later that night, as the conversation lulled and Tyler and David headed inside to call it a night, Megan stayed out for a while longer. She gazed at the stars, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The darkness felt soothing, as though the world was enveloping her in its embrace. She was ready for the next chapter of her life, but she was also ready to take the time to explore what it meant to live it on her own terms. In that stillness, Megan made a decision. When she returned to Oakage, she would focus on redefining her life, both personally and professionally. The idea of starting something new, without the constant shadow of her past looming over her, felt like the first step toward truly moving on. It was time to stop living in reaction to what had been and start living in response to what could be. The future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, Megan was excited to see where it would lead. The following week, Megan returned to Oakage with a renewed sense of purpose. She had spent the weekend reflecting and had come to a realization. She was ready for something new, both personally and professionally. The decision to embrace change wasn't sudden. It had been a slow awakening, a shift that had been building for months as she navigated her new role at Omni, the end of her marriage to Nate, and the intense emotional turmoil that had followed. She had felt as though she was constantly in survival mode, fighting for control over every aspect of her life, from the company to her personal identity. But now, as she re-entered her life in Oakage, she knew it was time to step into a space where she could thrive, not just survive. The first sign of this new phase came during a coffee meeting with Alicia, who was eagerly awaiting the latest update on the Horizon proposal. They met at one of their favorite cafes, a small, cozy place with mismatched furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. "How was the lake weekend?" Alicia asked as she took a sip of her latte. "Exactly what I needed," Megan replied, her voice softer than usual. "I think I've finally figured out where I need to go from here. Not just with Omni, but with everything. It's about more than just getting by or proving I can do it. It's about making sure that I want to do it." Alicia raised an eyebrow. "This sounds important. What's going on?" "I'm ready to make some changes," Megan said, leaning in slightly. "Not just with the company, but with myself. I've been so focused on proving my worth in these corporate spaces that I've neglected parts of myself. It's time to change that." Alicia smiled, nodding slowly. "I'm glad to hear that. You've been all business and no play for far too long. What are you thinking?" "I'm still figuring it out," Megan admitted. "But I know for sure I don't want my whole life to be about running a company or dealing with my past. I've already proven to myself I can handle the tough stuff. Now, I want to explore what brings me real happiness, outside of work." Alicia looked thoughtful for a moment before responding. "That makes sense. You've done more than enough to show everyone your worth. It's time to show yourself something new." The conversation lingered in Megan's mind as the days passed. She knew Alicia was right. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about living. As Megan prepared for the board vote on the Horizon proposal, she also began to mentally prepare for the shift she was about to make in her personal life. She was no longer defined by the pain of her divorce or her turbulent relationship with Nate. She had built something new, both within herself and at Omni. That week, the Horizon deal progressed, and the response from the board was overwhelmingly positive. The financial terms were solid, but what really sold the board was Megan's vision for Omni's future. The company wasn't just a business, it was an extension of her leadership, her ability to transform the company and steer it towards something greater. The final approval came through on Friday, officially marking the beginning of the next chapter for Omni. Megan had done it. She had taken a company teetering on the edge and transformed it into a thriving, forward-thinking organization. But the true victory for her wasn't just in the numbers. It was in the realization that she was now in control of her own life in a way she had never been before. And then there was Nate. He had remained somewhat peripheral in her mind after the Horizon proposal had gone through. But there were moments when she wondered how he was adjusting to his exit from the company. They had reached an unspoken understanding, professional civility with occasional reminders of their shared history, but Megan knew that their journey wasn't finished. There would still be bumps ahead, as the past had a way of resurfacing when least expected. One afternoon, shortly after the board's approval, Megan received a text from Nate. He had been quieter than usual, but his message seemed different this time, more personal. Megan, I know we've kept things strictly professional, but I wanted to thank you for how you've handled everything. You've shown me a kind of leadership I didn't think I'd see from you, especially given everything that's happened between us. You've proven something I never thought you would. Megan stared at the message for a few moments, unsure how to respond. She had always seen Nate as someone she could never truly trust again, not after the betrayal. But here he was, acknowledging her leadership in a way he hadn't before. Part of her felt vindicated, but the other part felt something else. Maybe it was a sliver of relief that the wounds between them were starting to heal, if only just enough to keep them from bleeding. After a few moments, she typed back. Thank you, Nate. I appreciate that. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me. But I'm glad we're both finding our own way forward. It was an answer that felt right, neutral, but honest. She wasn't ready to forgive him, nor was she ready to forget what had happened. But in that moment, she realized that she didn't need to. She had moved beyond the betrayal, beyond the need to prove anything to him, and into a place where her decisions were her own. The next few days passed in a blur of final meetings, preparations for the next phase of Omni's evolution, and a deepening sense of satisfaction in her new approach to life. She was finally allowing herself to step away from work and into her own personal life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Megan sat on her balcony, watching the last light of the day reflect off the glass of the city's skyline. It felt like she was watching the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The weekend at Lake Chatham had been the first step toward rediscovering who she was outside of work, and now, as the pieces of her new life fell into place, Megan felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't about business anymore. It was about living fully, living authentically. She knew that her future, whatever it held, was in her hands. And for the first time in a long while, Megan was ready to take the reins of her own happiness. The weeks following the Horizon deal were a whirlwind of strategic meetings, industry events, and personal revelations. Megan had done what many thought impossible. She had taken a company on the brink of collapse and transformed it into a powerhouse in the tech world. But as the horizon loomed before her, she realized that this was only the beginning of her true journey. Her relationship with Nate continued to evolve. It wasn't friendship, and it wasn't reconciliation, but a strange kind of respect had settled between them. They were no longer tethered by the emotional weight of their past, and their interactions, though occasionally awkward, were civil, even occasionally pleasant. The old tensions had dissipated, replaced by the kind of professional camaraderie that two former spouses who shared a history of mutual ambition and disappointment might develop. There were still moments when their old dynamics resurfaced, when Nate would offer unsolicited advice on an important business decision, or when Megan would catch herself lingering on the thought of the life they had once envisioned together. But those moments were fleeting. One evening, after a particularly challenging board meeting, Megan sat alone in her office, reviewing the quarterly numbers. Justin had left hours ago, and the office was empty save for the hum of the HVAC system. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Tyler. Are you free this weekend? Mark's place at the lake again. The offer still stands. She paused, her fingers hovering over the screen. A weekend escape had been exactly what she needed the last time she had gone, but this time, something was different. Megan wasn't just tired, she was ready for something more, something that had nothing to do with her role as CEO, nothing to do with her divorce, and nothing to do with the constant demands of the business world. For the first time in a long while, she was looking forward to something for her. She typed back quickly, I'll go, but no matchmaking this time, okay? Tyler's reply came almost immediately. I swear no setup. Just good company. I promise. The weekend at Lake Chatham proved to be everything Megan had hoped for. The pristine landscape and the isolation of the lake house allowed her to breathe in a way she hadn't been able to in Oakage. It was just her, Tyler, and David, the photojournalist, who turned out to be charming and unassuming. Despite her earlier hesitation, Megan found herself genuinely enjoying the company, her conversation with David flowing freely. They spoke about life, careers, and what it meant to start fresh. David, who had also gone through a recent divorce, shared his own story of reinvention, and Megan found herself drawn to his perspective. There was no pressure to perform or impress anyone, no corporate personas to uphold. It was just two people in the middle of a transitional phase, navigating the complexities of life with open minds. On Sunday afternoon, after a long hike and a leisurely lunch, Megan sat down with David on the porch, overlooking the lake as the afternoon sun began to set. The light was golden, casting long shadows over the water, and the air had cooled just enough to be comfortable. They talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time in a while, Megan felt truly at ease. You know, she said as she sipped her iced tea, I've been so focused on my career, and then on my divorce, that I forgot what it feels like to just enjoy life. To just live without worrying about every decision or every outcome. David smiled. I get that. Sometimes we forget that life isn't a list of to-dos. It's more than just achieving things. It's about feeling like we've experienced something, not just done something. Megan nodded, taking in the weight of his words. She wasn't ready for a new relationship. She hadn't even truly explored what it meant to be free of the past, but there was something liberating in the simplicity of the moment. For once, she didn't have to have it all figured out. She could simply be. The next week brought with it new challenges for Omni. Progress was steady, but as with any business, it came with its own set of hurdles. Nate, now officially out of the day-to-day operations, had sent her a congratulatory message about the company's quarterly success. She hadn't replied immediately, but after a moment of reflection, she did. Thanks, Nate. I'm glad to see you pursuing your next venture. I think you'll do great things. It was a simple response, but it felt significant. She wasn't trying to repair their broken marriage, but she was acknowledging that he, too, was moving forward. As Megan stood in front of the mirror that evening, getting ready for a dinner meeting with the board, she took a moment to really look at herself. The woman staring back at her was different from the one who had been thrust into this role out of desperation and anger. She was stronger now, more composed, and more confident in her decisions. She had come so far, but Megan knew this was only the beginning of her personal journey. The professional landscape of Omni was evolving, yes, but her true evolution had been within. She was learning to make choices not just for others, but for herself. To seek out happiness, not just success, and to embrace uncertainty without fear. As she adjusted her blazer and checked her reflection once more, she smiled to herself. The road ahead was still unwritten, but this time, she felt prepared to navigate it on her own terms. And that was the most empowering thing of all.